In the early hours of the morning, a thin, shaking voice called out through the shattered kitchen window of the Harlan estate, carried on a cold draft and the faint, sweet smell of gas that had been collecting inside the house for some time. The voice belonged to a young boy who was already halfway through the broken window, cutting his palm open on a shard of glass he had not seen in the dark, and bleeding onto the white marble of a kitchen island that had cost more than every place he had ever slept in his entire life combined. 2 stories above him, Theodore Harlan slept on his back, the way he had slept for most of his 71 years. His silver hair was combed flat against the pillow, even in sleep. His left hand rested on the duvet over his chest. His right hand rested on the empty side of the bed where his wife had slept for decades before the cancer took her in the spring. He was dreaming about a horse he had owned years ago, a chestnut mare named Grace who had thrown him twice and forgiven him both times. He was smiling slightly in the dream. He did not yet know that the gas line that ran behind the wall at the head of his bed had been tampered with very carefully over the course of several afternoons by a man who had grown up in this house and knew exactly which walls were hollow and which were not. The boy on the kitchen floor was named Darius. He was 8 years old. He weighed very little for his age. A stranger looking at his face in good light would have guessed younger, because the kind of hunger Darius had lived inside for many months tends to keep a child small in a particular and recognizable way. He wore a thin red hoodie with no shirt underneath. He wore jeans that had been a man's jeans once, and had been cut down with a kitchen knife and cinched at his waist with a length of orange twine. His sneakers had no laces. His left cheek was streaked with dried mud from sleeping earlier against the root of a sycamore tree in the small wooded ravine that ran along the back of the Harlan estate. He had climbed the tall iron fence at the rear of the property some time earlier. He had run across a lawn, mowed in perfect diagonal stripes. He had stood on the slate step at the kitchen door and found it locked. And he had stood there for a brief moment thinking about a grandmother who had died some years earlier when a gas line behind her stove had cracked, and who had asked a very young boy named Darius what that sweet smell was. The young boy had not known, and the grandmother had not believed her own nose, and she had died. He had stopped thinking about that, and picked up the heavy ceramic planta beside the step and thrown it through the kitchen window. Now he was inside. He pressed the cut on his palm against the front of his hoodie without looking at it, because looking at blood tended to make him slower, and slow was the one thing he could not be tonight. He moved through the kitchen on the balls of his feet. He did not call out. Calling out was something a boy could do, in a house where he had been invited. He had not been invited. The smell of gas was thicker in the hallway than it had been by the window. He could feel it in the back of his throat, soft and sweet, the way a cough drop is sweet. His grandmother's house had smelled exactly like this in the hour before it went up. He found the stairs. He went up them 2 at a time. He did not know which bedroom was the right bedroom. He guessed correctly that it would be the one at the far end of the upstairs hall, because rich men, in his experience, slept as far from their front doors as their houses would let them. He pushed the door open with his bloody palm. The man on the bed did not stir. Darius crossed the carpet. He did not have words ready. He had run all the way up the slope and over the fence and across the lawn and up the stairs without putting a single sentence together in his head. Because sentences cost time, and time was what the man on the bed did not have. He reached the bed. He put his small, bloody hand on the silver-haired man's shoulder and shook him hard, the way his grandmother had shaken him awake on school mornings before the fire. The man's eyes opened. For one long second, the two of them looked at each other in the dim blue of a bedside clock. A silver-haired millionaire in monogrammed pajamas on his back, half inside a dream about a horse. A muddy-cheeked boy in a red hoodie bleeding from his right palm, his left hand still gripping the man's shoulder. "There's a fire in your walls, sir," Darius said again, quieter this time because he was close enough now that he did not need to shout. "Right now. We have to go. We have to go now." Theodore Harlan had been woken in the middle of the night only a few times in the previous decade. Once by a phone call telling him his wife's scan results had come back. Once by a phone call telling him his wife had stopped breathing. Once by a hailstorm that had taken out the skylight above the upstairs library. And once by a security guard at the front gate who had mistaken a deer for an intruder. Each of those times, Theodore had come fully awake inside moments because a man who runs a company with many employees learns eventually to keep a small, clean room in the back of his mind where he can stand up and put on his shoes before the rest of him has finished waking. He came awake now inside moments. He did not say what. He did not say, "Who are you?" He did not say, "How did you get in this house?" He looked at the small boy with the bleeding hand and the muddy cheek and the red hoodie, and he looked at the boy's eyes, which were the eyes of a person telling the truth. And then he smelled for the first time what the boy was smelling. And the small, cold room in the back of his mind opened its door and stepped forward. "Show me," he said. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. He did not reach for his slippers, because the boy had said now. And Theodore Harlan had learned in 71 years of being a man people listen to that when a frightened child uses the word now, the cost of asking him to say it twice is sometimes a life. He stood. He took his reading glasses off the nightstand and put them in the pocket of his pajama shirt, because his reading glasses were the only thing in the bedroom that mattered to him, and even then, only because his wife had picked out the frames. He took Darius by the shoulder gently, the way a grandfather takes a grandson by the shoulder, and turned him toward the door. "Walk in front of me," he said. "Not fast. Steady. If you smell it getting stronger, you tell me, and we change direction. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. What's your name?" "Darius." "Darius, I'm going to thank you properly in a short while. Right now I'm going to ask you to keep walking." They went down the hall together. Theodore's bare feet made almost no sound on the runner. Darius's sneakers, which had no laces, slapped softly against the soles of his small, dirty feet. At the top of the stairs, Theodore stopped. He had lived in this house for many years. He knew the sound of it the way a sailor knows the sound of his own boat. And the house at this moment was making a sound it should not have been making. It was a low sound almost below hearing. A soft, continuous whisper coming from inside the wall to the left of the staircase, where the gas line ran from the basement up to the second-floor furnace. Theodore had not heard that sound in this house ever before. But he had heard it once many years ago in a chemistry lab at the university, the day before a graduate student had been killed when a fitting failed on a Bunsen burner line that had been left open overnight. He had not thought about that student in decades. He thought about him now. "Down the stairs," Theodore said, "quickly, but do not run." They went down. At the bottom, Theodore did not turn toward the front door, which was the door any reasonable person would have used. He turned instead toward the side door off the breakfast room, because the side door was the farthest door in the house from the gas main, and because many years of living somewhere teaches a man which exit is the right exit on the worst night of his life. They crossed the breakfast room. Theodore flipped no light switches. He had read somewhere a long time ago that the small spark inside a wall switch was enough to light a room full of gas. And although he was not certain that was still true with modern wiring, he was not in a mood to test it. The side door opened onto a slate patio. The patio opened onto the long, curving driveway that ran down to the white gate at the bottom of the hill. The night air, when it hit Theodore's face, was so cold and so clean, and so free of that sweet, sickening smell, that he understood for the first time just how thick the air inside his own house had become. He took one full breath. Then he took Darius by the wrist gently and led him out onto the driveway, farther and farther, until they were standing on the grass at the curve of the drive with the house behind them and the gate ahead. He turned around to look at the house. That was when he saw the second person in the driveway. The second person was standing some distance away between Theodore and the front door of the house, wearing a pair of navy silk pajamas and a pair of leather slippers that Theodore himself had given him for Christmas some years ago. His hair was uncombed, his arms were folded across his chest in a posture of waiting. He was in his 40s, his name was Nathaniel Harlan. He was Theodore's only son. He had not, Theodore noticed in the long, slow second before anyone spoke, run out of the house in alarm. He had walked out calmly some time ago and had been standing in the driveway waiting. Darius, at the end of Theodore's wrist, went very still. Then Darius raised his small bleeding hand and pointed straight at Nathaniel Harlan and said in a voice that was no longer shaking, "That's the man, sir. That's the man who did it. I saw him in the basement, over 3 Saturdays in a row." Nathaniel Harlan did not move for a long moment. He stood in his navy pajamas with his arms folded across his chest and looked at the small boy at the end of his father's wrist. And his face did the careful work of a face that had been preparing for this conversation, but had expected to have it without a witness. Then he smiled. It was a small, sad smile, the kind of smile a son gives a father at a funeral. "Dad," he said, "thank God you're out. I came as soon as I smelled it. I was in the guest house. I tried the house phone. It didn't connect. I was about to come in after you." He took one step forward on the gravel, and the gravel made a small, clean sound under his slipper. "Who is this child?" Theodore did not answer. He was instead doing a piece of arithmetic in his head, the way he did arithmetic in board meetings, when a number on a slide did not match a number he had memorized the night before. The guest house was some distance down the slope on the south side of the property. Nathaniel had moved into the guest house after the divorce. The guest house had its own gas line, a small one, fed off the same main that fed the main house. A man living in the guest house, if he had wanted to, could have walked up to the main house on any Saturday afternoon while his father was at the country club and let himself into the basement with a key he had been given as a teenager and worked slowly and unhurriedly on the run of black iron pipe that fed the second-floor furnace. A man living in the guest house would also, on a night when something was about to happen inside the main house, be the first person to notice the smell, because the wind on this hill at this time of year always blew from the north. Nathaniel had said, "I came as soon as I smelled it." Nathaniel's guest house was south of the main house. The wind tonight was, Theodore could feel it now on the side of his face, blowing from the north. The smell of gas leaking inside Theodore's bedroom could not, by any natural arrangement of air, have reached Nathaniel's guest house before it reached anyone else on the property. Theodore filed the arithmetic away. He did not show it on his face. "Nathaniel," he said quietly, "stay where you are. Dad, stay where you are, please." Nathaniel's smile did not move, but something behind it moved. A small adjustment, the way a curtain moves when someone behind it shifts their weight. He glanced down at the boy. He glanced back up at his father. "Dad, this child is bleeding. He's clearly in shock. He's wandered onto the property from God knows where, and he's saying God knows what. Let's get him to a hospital. Let's call the fire department. Let's not stand on the lawn." He paused very carefully. "Whatever he thinks he saw, we can sort it out in the morning." Theodore did not look at his son. He looked instead at Darius. He crouched slowly until his knees popped, and he brought his face down to the level of the boy's face. The grass under his bare feet was cold and wet. His pajama trousers were going to be ruined. He noticed neither of these things. "Darius, look at me, not at him, at me." Darius looked, his eyes were wide. "I want you to tell me exactly what you saw. I am not going to interrupt you. I am not going to ask you to prove it. Just tell me, slowly." The boy swallowed. The cut on his palm had opened again where he had pointed, and a thin line of blood was running down the inside of his wrist toward his elbow. He did not seem to notice it. 3 Saturdays ago, he said, I was in the woods behind the wall. I sleep there sometimes. I saw a car coming through the small gate at the back, the one where the gardener parks his truck. It was his car. He did not point this time. He just said, his. He had a bag, a canvas bag. He went in through the basement door, the one under the kitchen window. He stayed inside for about 2 hours. I know because my watch showed the time passing. He came out with the bag, and the bag was lighter because I watched how he carried it. He locked the door behind him, and he drove back out through the gardener's gate. He took a breath. He came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. The third time recently, the basement window was open a little bit, the small one by the rose bush. I went down there, after he left. I was hungry, and I thought maybe in a basement there is sometimes food. There wasn't food. There were pipes, the black pipes that go up the wall. One of them had been cut and a new piece had been put in, but it wasn't tight. It was loose. Sir, I could hear the air whisper in it. I could smell the sweet smell just a little. I knew that smell because my grandmother. His voice caught. He swallowed it down. I knew that smell. Theodore was very still. Why did you not come tell someone, Darius? The boy looked at him. There was no resentment in the look. There was only the patient, ancient, weary expression of a child who had already learned by 8 how the world responds to children like him. Sir, he said, who would have believed me? Behind them, somewhere inside the walls of the great dark house, the soft whisper of the loose fitting was now joined by a second sound, a low, almost musical hum. The sound a gas line makes when the pressure inside it has been climbing for a long time. Theodore stood up. He took the boy's small, good hand in his own, firmly, the way a man takes the hand of someone he intends not to let go of, and he turned them both slowly to face his son in the driveway. Nathaniel Harlan had not moved during the boy's account. He had kept his arms folded, his shoulders square, his head slightly tilted in the patient, receptive posture of a man listening to a piece of bad news he had already heard and was now hearing again for the benefit of someone else in the room. It was a posture Theodore knew well. He had taught it to his son himself years earlier in a glass-walled conference room on a high floor of the Harlan Tower, the day Nathaniel had joined the company as a junior associate. When a person is telling you something you do not want to hear, Theodore had said, let them finish. The one who interrupts is the one who looks guilty. Nathaniel had remembered the lesson. He had remembered it too well. Dad, Nathaniel said quietly when Darius had stopped speaking, you cannot be serious. Theodore did not answer. He was instead taking a slow inventory of the driveway in front of him. He was noting that his son was wearing slippers but no robe on a cold night. He was noting that his son's hair, which had been uncombed, was in fact uncombed, flattened on one side as though slept on, but standing up on the other side as though raked by a nervous hand. He was noting that his son's pajama collar was buttoned correctly to the top, which was the way Nathaniel had buttoned his pajamas as a child, and not the way a man buttons his pajamas when he has scrambled out of bed in the middle of the night because he smelled gas. He was noting that his son's car, a silver coupe, was not parked at the guest house where it should have been. It was parked at the top of the drive near the front of the house, where a man would park if he intended to leave quickly. Nathaniel, Theodore said, walk down the drive to the gate slowly. I want you on the other side of the gate when the fire department arrives. Dad, walk. Dad, listen to me. Nathaniel took one step forward. Just one. Whatever this child has told you, he is wrong. He is confused. He has been sleeping in the woods for God's sake. Look at him. He is barely conscious. Whatever he thinks he saw in the basement, he saw a contractor. I had someone out recently to look at the hot water heater. You remember you signed the invoice. Another half step. Very small. Dad, please. I know things have been hard between us this year. I know you are about to file something soon. I know what is in that filing. I have known about it for some time. But you cannot honestly believe that I would, that I could. He let the sentence stop where it had stopped. The way a man stops a sentence when he is counting on the other man to finish it in his head. Theodore finished it in his head. He finished it with the words, "Kill my own father." He let those words sit in the cold air between them for a long moment. Then he reached with his free hand into the pocket of his pajama shirt and took out his reading glasses and put them on slowly, the way an old man puts on his glasses when he wants to see a thing more clearly. He looked at his son through the glasses. "You knew about the filing," he said. It was not a question. It was the closing of a small, clean door inside his chest. Nathaniel's face did not change, but his hands did. His arms came unfolded, and his hands moved very slightly to a position at his sides where the fingers were no longer relaxed. They were curled just slightly. "Dad, I had not told you about the filing, Nathaniel. I had not told anyone except Lillian and the 2 attorneys in her office who drafted it. Lillian was instructed recently to keep it sealed until the morning it was to be filed. There is no version of this story in which you knew about that filing some time ago." Theodore's voice was very quiet. It carried easily in the cold air. "You knew about it because you have someone inside Lillian's office, or because you have someone inside this house, or both." Nathaniel said nothing. "Walk to the gate. Dad, you are going to embarrass yourself. Walk to the gate." Behind them, very faintly, Theodore heard the low hum from inside the wall change pitch. It climbed half a tone, the way a kettle climbs half a tone, in the last moment before the whistle. He did not turn around to look at the house. He kept his eyes on his son. He had been a man who watched faces for many years, and he knew that the only thing on the property right now that could still be reasoned with was the face in front of him, and only for another few seconds. Darius at Theodore's side tugged once on his hand, a small, urgent tug. "Sir," Darius whispered, "we need to be farther away." Nathaniel heard him. Nathaniel looked at the small boy with the bloody hand for one long second, and something in Nathaniel's face, the careful, arranged thing that had been holding it together, slipped half an inch to the side. It was not anger that came through the slip. It was not even fear. It was something colder than either of those. The bare, unguarded look of a man who has just understood that his entire plan had not accounted for one variable, and that the variable was 8 years old and wearing a hoodie with no shirt underneath. Theodore saw the look. Theodore had been a father long enough to know what it meant. "Lillian," he said aloud to no one, because his phone was upstairs on a nightstand inside a house that was about to come apart. "I am going to need you here soon." Then he tightened his grip on Darius's small hand, and he turned them both, and he began to walk quickly now, but still not running toward the white gate at the bottom of the drive with his back to his son for the first time in many years. They had made it some distance down the drive when the house went. It did not explode the way a house explodes in a film. It did not lift off its foundation in a ball of orange. The gas had been leaking for some time by then, but it had been leaking into the wall cavities and the basement and the attic crawl space, not into the open rooms, and the rooms themselves had been ventilated just enough by an old house's natural drafts to keep the mixture in most of the house, below the threshold a flame could catch. So what happened when it happened was smaller and more particular, and in its own quiet way more terrible. The wall behind the kitchen, the one Darius had cut his palm on, blew outward in a single soft whump that sounded from a distance like a heavy book being dropped on a hardwood floor. A long jet of pale blue flame followed it, leaning sideways into the cold air, almost gentle, almost beautiful. The flame hit the dry pine trees that bordered the kitchen wing, and the pine trees, which had not been watered since the summer drought, and were standing in their own carpet of dead needles, went up quickly with the dry, crackling roar of a thing that had been waiting a long time to burn. Theodore did not look back. He had been counting his steps in his head, and at a certain point the heat hit the back of his neck like an open oven door, and he pulled Darius against the side of his hip and bent over the boy, and he kept walking. Nathaniel was no longer behind them. Theodore did not know exactly when Nathaniel had stopped following, because Theodore had stopped looking at his son the moment he had turned away. He would learn later that Nathaniel had run for the silver coupe at the top of the drive, and that the silver coupe had not started, because Lillian Hart had, earlier that night, On a hunch she had been unable to explain even to herself, called the security firm that monitored the Harlan estate and asked them to put a quiet hold on every vehicle registered to anyone in the Harlan family until she gave them the all-clear. The security firm, which was paid a great deal of money to act on Lillian Hart's hunches without asking questions, had remotely disabled the ignition on several vehicles. The silver coupe had been one of them. Nathaniel was, at the moment the wall came apart, standing next to a car that would not start in his slippers with his hand on the door handle. Theodore reached the white gate. He pressed his palm against the small black keypad set into the stone column. The keypad lit up. He typed 4 digits, his wife's birthday, the same 4 digits he had typed every day for decades and had not changed in the months since she had died, because changing them had felt like erasing her. And the great iron gate, tall and made of the same iron as the fence Darius had climbed earlier that night, began to swing open with the slow, patient hum of expensive machinery. Theodore did not wait for it to finish opening. He stepped through the gap as soon as it was wide enough for both of them. He pulled Darius through. He turned finally and looked back. The kitchen wing of the house was a column of orange. The fire had jumped from the pine trees to the cedar shake roof, and the roof, which had been replaced some years ago, with shingles that the contractor had sworn were fire-rated, and which, like many things contractors swear, was less than entirely true, was now feeding the fire upward. The bedroom Theodore had been sleeping in, minutes earlier, was at this moment no longer there. The window his wife had once spent an entire summer choosing curtains for was a black square inside a frame of flame. Some distance up the drive, Nathaniel Harlan was running back toward the gate. He was running unevenly, because he was running in slippers on gravel. He was shouting something. The shouting did not carry over the sound of the fire. Theodore pulled Darius a few more yards down the road, past the gate, past the stone column, until they were standing on the far side of the road on the strip of grass between the asphalt and the drainage ditch. He crouched again. He took Darius by both shoulders gently and turned the boy so the boy's back was to the burning house, so the boy would not have to watch. Darius. Yes, sir. You are bleeding. You are bleeding more than I think you realize. I'm going to take off my pajama shirt, and I am going to wrap your hand. I'm going to do it tightly. It will hurt. I am sorry. Okay, sir. Theodore unbuttoned the pajama shirt, slowly because his fingers were shaking, and he did not want the boy to see them shake. He took the shirt off. He was underneath wearing a thin cotton undershirt, the kind men of his generation still wore under their pajamas, and the cold air bit through it at once. He did not notice. He folded the pajama shirt into a long strip, the way a soldier folds a field bandage, and wrapped the strip around Darius's small bleeding palm several times, and tied it off at the wrist with a knot he had learned years ago on a fishing boat with his father, who had been dead now for some time. He looked at his work. The shirt had been white. It was already going pink at the center. Sir, Darius said quietly, your house. Theodore looked over his shoulder. The whole north wing was gone now. The fire had crossed the central hall and was working on the south wing. He watched the library window, the one with the curved glass his wife had ordered from Europe some years ago, go orange, and then white, and then black. He felt distantly, the way a man feels a thing in the chest when the thing is too large to feel properly, yet that an entire lifetime of rooms had just ended. He turned back to the boy. Yes, he said, my house. And then, in the soft, strange voice of a man who has just understood something he had not understood minutes earlier, he added, but not the part that mattered. That part is standing right in front of me. The first siren came up the hill soon after. The fire engine came around the last bend in the road with its headlights cutting across the trees, and behind it came a second engine. And behind the second engine, police cruisers. They had been called, Theodore would learn later, not by him and not by Nathaniel and not by any neighbor on the hill, but by the alarm company that monitored the Harlan estate, which had registered a sudden catastrophic temperature spike in the kitchen sensor and had, per its protocol, dispatched both fire and police automatically without waiting for a confirmatory phone call. The first engine stopped at the open gate. The captain, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache, swung down from the cab and took in the scene in the way men in his profession learn to take in scenes, which is to say in pieces, very fast without expression. He saw the house. He saw the trees. He saw an old man in a thin cotton undershirt standing on the grass on the far side of the road with a small bleeding boy. He saw up the driveway behind the open gate a younger man in pajamas standing very still beside a silver coupe. He walked first to Theodore. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "Yes." "Anyone else inside?" "No." "You sure?" "I am sure." "Staff, family, anyone? Oh, one." "My son is up the drive. He was in the guest house. He is out." The captain looked up the drive at Nathaniel. He looked back at Theodore. He looked at the boy. He looked at Theodore's pajama shirt, which was wrapped around the boy's hand and was no longer pink, but red. "This child needs a paramedic. We have one in the second engine. I'm going to call her down. I am also going to ask you to stay exactly where you are standing and not move from this spot until one of my officers takes a statement. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "Are you injured?" "No." "Are you sure?" Theodore thought about the question. He thought about it for a longer moment than the captain had expected him to. Then he said, "I am sure that I am not burned. I'm not sure about the rest of it. But that is not your problem tonight." The captain looked at him for 1 second more. Then he nodded once and turned and started barking orders at the men coming off the second engine. A paramedic in a navy jacket reached them within the minute. She was a small woman with her hair in a tight braid, and she crouched in front of Darius, the way Theodore had crouched, which Theodore noticed and approved of. She introduced herself as Sophia. She asked Darius if she could look at his hand. Darius looked up at Theodore first, the way a child looks up at the adult who is currently in charge of him, and Theodore nodded, and Darius held out his wrapped hand. Sophia unwrapped the pajama shirt slowly. She made a small sound in her throat when she saw the cut. The sound a professional makes when a thing is worse than they had hoped, but not as bad as they had feared. The cut ran across the heel of the palm from the base of the thumb, almost to the wrist. It was deep. It would need stitches. "It was not," she said quietly to Theodore over the top of Darius's head, "going to take a tendon." Theodore understood that she was telling him this so he would not have to ask. "Darius," Sophia said, "I am going to clean this and put a real bandage on it right here. And then I'm going to ask you to come with me to the truck so we can do a few more things. Is that all right with you?" "Yes, ma'am. And your friend here is going to come too, because I don't think he is going anywhere without you tonight. Is that right?" Darius looked up at Theodore a second time. Theodore's eyes behind the reading glasses he had still not taken off did a small surprising thing. They filled. He did not let the filling become anything more than a filling, because he was a man of 71 years who had learned in the months since his wife had died how to keep a face in its assigned position. But the filling was there, and Darius, who had become a careful reader of adult faces, saw it. "Yes, ma'am," Darius said. "He is going to come too." A police officer arrived at Theodore's elbow a moment later. She was younger than the fire captain, and she had her notebook already open. She introduced herself as Officer Hayes. She asked Theodore if he was prepared to give a preliminary statement. Theodore said he was. She asked him to describe what had happened in his own words. Theodore described it. He described being woken by a small boy. He described the smell. He described walking out of the side door. He described the sound inside the wall of the staircase. He described more slowly finding his son in the driveway in pajamas and slippers with the silver coupe parked at the top of the drive. He described, slower still, the fact that his son had referenced a sealed legal filing that his son was not supposed to know existed. He described what Darius had told him about the 3 Saturdays in the basement. Officer Hayes wrote without looking down at her notebook. When he had finished, she said very quietly, "Mr. Harlan, I want to be careful here. I'm hearing you describe a possible arson with intent to commit homicide, and I am hearing you identify your son as the suspect. Before I take that any further, I am required to ask you, are you certain? Theodore did not hesitate. Officer, I am 71 years old. I have made many decisions in my life that I was not certain about. This is not one of them. My son knew about a filing that no one outside my attorney's office could have known about. My son was standing in the driveway in pajamas when the boy and I came out of the house on the wrong side of the wind, which means he was outside before the smell could have reached the guest house. His car was parked at the top of the drive, not down at the guest house where he sleeps. And he has, since I came out of that house, told 2 small lies and 1 large one. I am certain. She wrote that down also. Then I'm going to ask you to come to the station with me soon, once the paramedic has cleared the boy. I'm going to ask you not to speak to your son before then. Is that understood? Yes. Up the driveway behind the open gate, Nathaniel Harlan was sitting now on the ground beside the silver coupe, with his head in his hands. A second officer was standing near him, not touching him, just standing, the way a man stands near another man who has not yet been told that he is no longer free to leave. Theodore looked at him for a long moment. He did not feel hate. He had expected somewhere in the back of his mind during the walk down the drive to feel hate when this moment came. He did not. He felt instead a vast, quiet sorrow, the sorrow of a father looking at a son in his 40s and seeing underneath the silver, in the son's hair and the lines around the son's eyes, a young boy who had once climbed into his lap on a Sunday afternoon with a picture book about horses. He turned away. He put his hand on Darius's good shoulder. The 2 of them, the old man in the undershirt and the small boy with the freshly bandaged hand, walked together toward the second fire engine, where Sophia was waiting with the door open. The inside of the second engine was warm in a way that surprised Darius. He had spent enough nights outdoors in the last many months to have developed strong opinions about warmth, and he had expected the inside of a fire truck to be the cold metal interior of a working machine. It was not. There was a small heater built into the wall of the equipment bay, and Sophia had turned it on the moment she had brought him aboard. And the air, when Darius climbed up onto the long bench seat, was the temperature of a living room in winter. He had not been inside a living room in winter in many months. Sophia wrapped a silver foil blanket around his shoulders before she asked him a single question about his hand. She did it without comment, the way a person does a thing she has done 1,000 times. And Darius understood that she had done this for many small cold boys before him, and that the silver blanket was not a special kindness aimed at him in particular, but rather a piece of standard equipment used on every small cold person who came through that door. He found, to his surprise, that knowing this did not make the blanket feel less kind. It made it feel more kind because a kindness that was waiting for him in a truck, before anyone knew his name was, he thought, the better kind of kindness. Theodore sat on the bench beside him. Sophia had not asked Theodore to come in. She had also not asked him not to. She was, Darius had noticed, a careful reader of which adult belonged with which child. "Darius," she said, "I'm going to clean this cut now. It is going to sting. I'm going to count to 3, and then I am going to do it. 1, 2, 3. She did it. Darius did not make a sound, although his eyes watered and he bit down very hard on the inside of his cheek. Sophia noticed both the eyes and the cheek. She did not comment on either. "Good," she said when she was finished. "Very good. Now, I am going to do the stitches. I am going to numb you first. The needle for the numbing is the worst part. After that, you will not feel the stitches. I want you to know that going in." "Okay, ma'am. And while I am working, your friend here. What is your name, sir?" "Theodore. Theodore here is going to tell you a story about anything. About a horse, about a baseball game, about a meal he had once. He's going to talk the whole time. That is his Is that all right?" Theodore cleared his throat. He had not, in 71 years, been assigned a job by a paramedic in the back of a fire engine in the middle of the night. He found that he did not mind. "Darius," Theodore said, "have I told you about the horse?" "No, sir." "Her name was Grace. I bought her years ago at an auction in Kentucky. I was young, and I had no business owning a horse. I knew nothing about horses. I had read one book. The book had been written long ago, and most of what it said was wrong. Grace was a chestnut mare, and she had a white star between her eyes the size of a silver dollar. Sophia had begun on the numbing. Darius flinched at the first stick and then went still. Theodore kept talking. "She threw me, twice. The first time was the second day I had her. I had not learned yet that you do not approach a horse from directly in front, because a horse cannot see what is directly in front of it. I walked up to her with an apple held out in my hand. She could not see the apple. She could only see a young man walking straight at her face with his arm raised. She did what any reasonable horse would do. She reared. I went over backwards into a fence. I cracked 2 ribs. The apple rolled under the stall door, and Grace, who had been able to see it once it was on the ground, ate it through the gap. The second time was some months later. I had learned by then how to approach her. I had not learned how to ride her properly in heavy rain. We were in a field about a mile from the barn when a thunderstorm came in faster than I had estimated. The first crack of thunder went off directly over us. Grace reared again. I came off again. This time I broke my left wrist on a rock. Grace, having thrown me, did not run home. She stood in the rain with her head down over me for some time until my father came looking. My father said later that he had never seen a horse do that for a person who had not earned it, and that I had not earned it, and that the horse was a better judge of character than I was. Darius made a small sound that in a boy who had not been allowed to laugh in a long time was the start of a laugh. I kept her for many years. She forgave me everything I ever did wrong. I do not believe in the 71 years I have lived on this earth that I have ever been forgiven for that many things by any other living creature, 2-legged or 4-legged. What happened to her? Darius asked. She got old. She got old the way good horses get old. Slowly with dignity, and she stopped being able to carry weight, and then she stopped being able to walk. And then one morning I sat with her in her stall for some time, and the vet came, and I held her head, and she went. I'm sorry, sir. Thank you, Darius. It was a long time ago, but thank you. Sophia tied off the last stitch. All done, she said quietly. You did beautifully, both of you. She began to wrap a clean white bandage around Darius's hand. The bandage was thicker than the pajama shirt had been and softer, and it stayed white. She looked up at Theodore. Her eyes did a small, careful thing. Mr. Harlan, the boy is medically stable. He has lost some blood, but not a dangerous amount. The cut would have closed on its own eventually, but he would have carried a scar that limited his hand. He will not now. The bigger issue is that he is significantly underweight. He is hypothermic on the borderline, and he is by his own account in the trucks just now currently unhoused. Officer Hayes is going to need to know that there will be a social worker involved before long. I am telling you this so you are not surprised. Theodore did not answer right away. He looked at Darius. Darius was looking at the floor of the truck. The silver blanket had slipped from one of his shoulders, and Theodore reached over and pulled it back into place without thinking. Sophia, Theodore said quietly, who do I call to make sure that this boy is not tonight taken anywhere that he does not want to be taken? Sophia looked at him. Mr. Harlan, you are not his guardian. You have known him for less than an hour. I am aware. Then I am going to tell you the honest answer, which is that the social worker who comes will make her own determination, and there is nothing you or I can do to override her. But there is one thing you can do tonight that will matter to her in the morning, and that is to be the adult who stays in the room with him from this moment until she arrives, and to not leave that room for any reason, and to make it very clear to her when she gets there that you are not asking to take him home. You are asking to be the person who sits with him until his grandfather is found. Theodore blinked. His grandfather? Sophia nodded at Darius. He told me while you were giving your statement to Officer Hayes. He has a grandfather. The grandfather works nights at a warehouse. The grandfather does not know yet that his grandson has been sleeping in your woods for the past several weeks, because the grandson has been telling him he is staying with a friend from school. There is no friend from school. There has not been a friend from school since the apartment was lost recently. Theodore was very quiet. "Find the grandfather," he said. "I have already given his name to Officer Hayes. She is making the call now." Theodore reached out slowly and put his hand lightly on the back of Darius's small head. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Darius leaned just slightly into the hand, and the way a tired animal leans into a thing that is warm. Lillian Hart arrived later that night. She came up the hill in the back of a black car, driven by a man Theodore did not recognize, which meant the man was new and had been vetted by Lillian personally, because Lillian did not allow any driver near Theodore who had not been background checked by a firm she had used for many years. The car stopped at the gate, which was now closed again and ringed by yellow tape. A young officer at the tape lifted a hand to wave the car off. The young officer then saw who was in the back seat, and he lifted the tape instead. Lillian got out of the car. She was wearing professional attire and a long coat, and her hair, which she had not had time to do, was pulled back with a plain band. She walked past the smoldering remains of the north wing of the Harlan estate without looking at it, because Lillian did not waste her attention on things that could no longer be helped. She walked toward the second fire engine where she had been told on the phone that her client was sitting. She climbed into the back of the truck without asking permission. She took in the scene in moments. Theodore in his undershirt with a silver blanket around his own shoulders now, because Sophia had eventually insisted. Darius beside him in the larger silver blanket with a clean white bandage on his hand and the beginnings of color in his cheeks. Sophia in the far corner, packing equipment. Lillian sat down on the bench across from them. She looked at Darius first, not at Theodore. "Hello," she said. "My name is Lillian. I am Mr. Harlan's lawyer. What is your name?" "Darius, ma'am." "Darius, that is a very good name. May I shake your good hand?" "Yes, ma'am." She shook it. She did it gravely with her full attention, the way she would have shaken the hand of a senior partner at a firm. Darius, who had never had his hand shaken by an adult before, sat up half an inch straighter on the bench. Then she looked at Theodore. "Tell me," Theodore told her. He told her in the short, clean sentences he had been telling things in for the last many years of working with Lillian Hart. The smell, the boy, the walk, the driveway, Nathaniel in pajamas on the wrong side of the wind, the reference to the filing, the car parked at the top of the drive, the 3 Saturdays in the basement, the tampered line, the pine trees, the bedroom that was no longer there. Lillian listened without interrupting once. When he had finished, she said, "Where is Nathaniel?" "In the back of the second cruiser. They have not arrested him yet. They are waiting for the fire marshal to confirm the cause. The fire marshal will confirm the cause soon, because the basement is going to tell him everything he needs to know. Nathaniel will be in custody by morning." "I know, Theodore." "Yes, I need you to listen to me very carefully now, because the next period of time is going to determine the next years of this family, and I need your head clear." "My head is clear." "Good. Then hear me. There's going to be a press call by morning. The fire was visible from several neighborhoods. The cars at the gate include engines and cruisers and a fire marshal's truck. Helicopters have already passed overhead. The story is going to be on every screen in the city by noon. You do not control whether the story exists. You control only one thing, which is what is in it. So I am going to ask you a question, and your answer will tell me what to do. Do you want the boy in the story?" Theodore did not answer right away. He looked at Darius. Darius was leaning against him now. The boy had not meant to fall asleep. Theodore understood, but the warmth of the truck and the warmth of the blanket and the dropping of the fear had done their work, and Darius's head had come to rest against the side of Theodore's arm, somewhere around the part about the silver coupe, and Darius's breathing had slowed, and Darius was at this moment asleep against him. Theodore did not move his arm. No, he said. "I do not want the boy in the story." Lillian nodded once. "Then he will not be in it. He will be referred to, in the official statement, as a young witness whose identity is being protected. The fire department will not name him. The police department will not name him. The reporters who have already arrived at the bottom of the hill will be reminded in a phone call I will make soon that their press passes depend on their not naming him. He will not be photographed. His grandfather, whom Officer Hayes reached at the warehouse earlier, will be told what has happened in private, in a room at the precinct with a social worker, and with me present before any reporter knows the boy exists. His grandfather coming. They sent a car for him. His shift ends soon, but his supervisor released him when Officer Hayes called. He should be at the precinct soon. What is his name? Raymond Ellis, in his 60s, widowed, worked the same warehouse for many years. Raised his daughter alone after her mother died, and raised this boy alone after his daughter died of an overdose some years ago. Lost the apartment recently when the warehouse cut his hours after a back injury. Has been staying since then on a friend's couch. The friend has a small apartment and a family, and there was no room for Darius. Darius did not tell his grandfather this. Darius told his grandfather he had a friend from school. Raymond Ellis will learn tonight at the precinct that there was no friend from school. He will learn it from me, because I am going to be the one who tells him. Theodore closed his eyes for a moment. Lillian. Yes. How quickly can you find an apartment for the grandfather and the boy? By later today, there is a 2-bedroom that one of my paralegals has been holding for a different client whose closing fell through recently. It is clean. It is furnished. It is near a good elementary school, and the rent has already been paid through the next period. I will move them in this afternoon if Raymond Ellis agrees. He may not agree. He is a proud man. He has spent many years not asking anyone for anything. I will not push him. I will offer it as a loan, not a gift, with terms he can refuse if he chooses. If he refuses, we will find another way. Lillian? Yes. How long have you been my attorney? Many years. In all those years, have I ever once told you that you are the best thing that ever happened to this family? Lillian looked at him. Her face did not change, but the corner of her mouth, which almost never moved. You have not, she said, but I will accept the late delivery. In the warm, small space of the back of the fire engine, with the smell of smoke still drifting through the half-open door, and the first gray light of morning beginning very faintly to come up behind the hills, Theodore Harlan put his free hand over his face for a long moment, and he did not let himself cry because the boy was asleep against his other arm, and he had decided some hours earlier that he was not going to be the kind of man who woke that boy. Raymond Ellis arrived at the precinct later that night. He was a tall, thin man, taller than Theodore by half a head, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of long, careful hands that had spent many years moving boxes off a conveyor belt without dropping any of them. He wore a heavy canvas work jacket and work pants. He had a thermos of coffee in his left hand that he had been carrying when his supervisor had told him to leave, and he had not in the time since remembered to put it down. The thermos had gone cold. Lillian met him in the lobby. She introduced herself. She asked him to come with her into a small private room down a side hallway. She did not say in the lobby anything about why he was there, because she had learned a long time ago that the lobby of a police station was a place where a grandfather should not be given news. In the small room with the door closed and the blinds drawn, and a paper cup of fresh coffee in front of him, that he had not asked for, and that he also did not touch, Raymond Ellis listened to Lillian Hart tell him what his grandson had done that night. He listened without moving. He did not interrupt. His eyes, which were a darker brown than Darius's eyes, but had the same particular steadiness, did not leave Lillian's face. When she had finished, he sat for a long moment, and then he asked very quietly the only question that mattered to him. Where is he? He is in the family lounge at the end of this hallway. He is asleep on a couch. There is a paramedic checking on him regularly. There is also an older gentleman in the room with him, the owner of the house. He has refused to leave the boy's side since earlier. He has said he will leave the moment you arrive and not before. Take me to him, Ms. Hart. Take me to him, please. Lillian stood. She led him down the hall. She opened the door of the family lounge softly, the way a person opens a door behind which a child is sleeping. Raymond Ellis stepped inside. The lounge was a small room with a couch and 2 chairs and a table with a coffee pot that no one had touched. Darius was curled on the couch under a thin blue blanket the precinct kept for nights like this one. The silver foil blanket had been folded and placed on the back of the couch behind his head, the way a man folds and sets aside a piece of equipment he no longer needs. The clean white bandage on his hand was visible against the blue of the blanket. He was breathing slowly and evenly. He was for the first time in many months asleep indoors in a room with a door that locked and an adult in it who was paid to make sure no one came in who did not belong. Theodore Harlan was sitting in the chair across from the couch. He had been given a sweatshirt by someone at the precinct. The sweatshirt was gray and too large and had the word police printed across the chest in white block letters. And Theodore, who had not worn a sweatshirt in many years, was wearing it now, without comment. The reading glasses were still in the breast pocket of the undershirt underneath. He had not been able to part with them. He stood up when Raymond Ellis came in. The 2 men looked at each other across the small room for a long moment. They had not before this moment ever been in a room together. They were, in most measurable ways, men from 2 different worlds. The clothes they wore did not cost the same amount of money. The schools they had attended did not exist in the same conversations. The neighborhoods they had grown up in were separated by distance and by every law of zoning and lending the city had passed in the last 100 years. In this room on this morning, none of it mattered. There were 2 old men, both widowed, both responsible for keeping a small boy alive, both of whom had failed at it in their own different ways for their own different reasons. Until hours ago, a small boy had decided to save them instead. Theodore spoke first. "Mr. Ellis, sir, I am very sorry." Raymond Ellis looked at him. The look went on for a long time. Then he said in a voice that was lower than Lillian had expected, and was in some way she could not have explained, harder to refuse than a louder voice would have been. "Sir, do not be sorry to me. My grandson is alive. Your house is gone. We are not this morning in equal positions of needing apology. Sit down before you fall down." Theodore sat. Raymond Ellis walked to the couch. He moved the way a tall man moves when he is trying not to make the floor shake. He crouched beside his grandson. He did not touch the boy. He looked at him for a long, careful moment, the way a man looks at a thing he had been afraid he might never see again. Then he reached out with one long finger and very gently brushed a piece of hair off the boy's forehead. Darius did not wake. Raymond Ellis stayed there, crouched beside the couch for what was probably a minute, and felt longer. When he stood, his eyes were wet, but he did not let the wetness be more than wetness. He turned to Theodore. "Sir," he said, "the woman, your lawyer, has offered me an apartment. She has offered it as a loan. She has been very careful about the word loan. I have been a man my whole life who pays his own way. I want you to understand that." "I understand. But I have also been a man my whole life who does what is right for that boy. And what is right for that boy is a bed indoors tonight and a school nearby in the morning and a roof over his grandfather's head, so the grandfather can pick up extra work again and not have to choose between a roof and the boy's shoes. So I am going to say yes to the apartment as a loan. I will pay it back at a rate we can agree on. I do not need charity. I need a starting line. It is a loan. Then I accept it. Mr. Ellis, sir, there is going to be a press call soon. Your grandson is not going to be in it. His name is not going to be in it. His face is not going to be in it. My attorney has already made the necessary calls. I want you to hear that from me, not from her, so that you know the decision came from this room." Raymond Ellis looked at him for a long beat. "Thank you," he said quietly. That was the right decision. It was the only decision. No, sir, there were other decisions available to you. You chose the right one. That is not the same thing. I have spent many years watching men in your position choose the other decisions. I will remember that you did not. Theodore did not answer. He could not answer. He looked at the floor of the family lounge for a moment, and the floor of the family lounge was a worn industrial tile that had been waxed too many times. And he found, looking at it, that he could keep his face in its assigned position for one more minute. Outside the small window of the lounge, the gray light of morning was coming up properly now over the hills, and the smell of smoke from a place some distance away was faintly still on the breeze. In the weeks that followed, on a quiet afternoon, Theodore Harlan parked a rented sedan at the curb of a small two-bedroom apartment on a tree-lined street and sat for a long moment with his hands on the steering wheel before he got out. The house on the hill was gone. The insurance adjusters had finished their work. The arson investigation had finished its work. The fire marshal's report had concluded what everyone in the small private room at the precinct had already known. The gas line behind the second-floor furnace had been altered by a person with access to the basement and a working knowledge of the house's mechanical systems. The alteration had been made over several periods. The person who had made it had been arrested, charged, and was now awaiting trial without bail, represented by an attorney his father was not paying for. Theodore had been clear about that. Lillian had been clearer. Theodore had not visited his son. He was not sure yet whether he ever would. Lillian had told him not to make the decision now. Lillian had said that some decisions are not for the first month or the second or the sixth. Lillian had said that the only decision required of him this month was to keep getting out of bed in the morning, and that he was doing that, and that the rest could wait. He had been staying in a small furnished apartment of his own nearby that Lillian had arranged the same afternoon she had arranged the one for the Ellises. He had not wanted to go to a hotel. He had not wanted to go to any of the other houses he owned. He had wanted, for reasons he could not quite have explained even to himself, to be within walking distance of the boy. He got out of the car. He carried in his right hand a small paper bag from a bookstore. Inside the bag was a book about horses. It was not the book he had read years ago. It was a better book, a newer one, written by someone who had spent many years training thoroughbreds, and who knew, among other things, the correct way to approach a horse from the side rather than the front. He had also put inside the bag at the last moment a small wooden carving of a chestnut mare with a white star between her eyes that he had found at an estate sale the week before and had not been able to leave behind. Raymond Ellis opened the door. The apartment behind him smelled like onions and garlic and something braising slowly in a pot. There was a small Christmas tree in the corner of the front room, with a string of white lights on it. The tree was not large. It was the right size for the room. There were a few ornaments on it, and Theodore understood, looking at them, that the ornaments had been made by Darius in school in the previous week, because they were paper and they had glitter, and one of them was a small lopsided star with the word Grandpa written across it in careful crayon letters. "Come in, sir," Raymond said. "He has been watching the window for you for some time." Theodore came in. Darius was sitting on the floor in front of the small Christmas tree. He had on a clean sweater that fit him properly, and jeans that fit him properly, and a pair of new sneakers with the laces tied. His hair had been freshly trimmed. The cut on his palm had closed into a thin, pale line that ran from the base of his thumb to his wrist. And Sophia had been correct. It had not taken a tendon, and he was at this moment using that same hand to hold a green crayon with which he was drawing on a sheet of paper. He looked up when Theodore came in. His face did the small, surprised lighting up that children's faces do when the person they have been waiting for actually arrives, and he scrambled to his feet, and he crossed the room at a run, and he stopped about a few feet from Theodore, and looked up at him with the gravity he had carried that night on the gravel of the driveway. "Hello, sir." "Hello, Darius. How is your house?" "My house is gone." "I know. I'm sorry." "Thank you. I am building a new one. Smaller, closer to tone. Can I see it when it is done? You can see it before it is done. You can come with me this weekend if your grandfather says yes, and we can walk around the empty lot, and I can show you where the kitchen will go. The kitchen will be on the south side this time, not the north. I have learned a thing or two about kitchens. Darius nodded solemnly, the way an 8-year-old nods when an adult has told him a true thing. Theodore handed him the bag. Darius took it carefully with both hands, the way he had once taken the silver blanket from Sophia. He opened it. He took out the book first. He looked at the cover for a long moment, which had on it a photograph of a chestnut mare in a green field at evening. Then he took out the small wooden carving. He held it in his palm. He looked up at Theodore. "Is this Grace, sir?" "No," Theodore said. "Grace is gone, but this is a horse who looks the way she looked. I thought you might like to have her to remember the story." Darius closed his small fingers around the wooden horse. He held it against his chest just for a moment. Then he looked up at his grandfather, who was watching from the kitchen doorway, with a dish towel over his shoulder, and Raymond Ellis nodded once, and Darius turned back to Theodore. "Sir," he said, "will you stay for dinner? Grandpa made the rice and chicken. There is a lot." Theodore looked at Raymond Ellis. Raymond Ellis nodded again slowly with the careful permission of a man who had thought some time ago that he would never invite a stranger to his table again, and who had decided sometime in the last period that this particular stranger was no longer one. "I would like that very much," Theodore said. "Thank you." He took off his coat. He hung it on the hook by the door. He followed the small boy and the tall, thin grandfather into a kitchen that smelled like a home. And he sat down at a small table that had been set for 2, and was now quickly and without comment being set for 3. And he understood as he sat that the house on the hill had burned down, for a reason he did not yet have words for, and that the house he was sitting inside now, with its few ornaments on its small tree, and its pot of rice on its small stove, and its small boy carefully placing a wooden horse beside his own plate, was in every way that mattered the only house he had left. Outside, the light was already going. It was winter and the days were short, but the windows of the apartment were warm and the lights inside it were on. And from the sidewalk, if a person had been walking past, they would have seen 3 figures around a small kitchen table. And they would not have known which one of them had saved which, and they would not, looking in, have been able to tell that any of it had ever been any other way. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe for more stories about the small acts of courage that change everything, and the unlikely heroes who see what the rest of the world walks past. This story is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are imaginary and do not represent any real people or true events. It is intended for storytelling and emotional reflection only.